Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Trond Arne Undheim. He's a futurist, an author, a speaker, an entrepreneur, the former director of the MIT Startup Exchange, which is outside of Boston. He's accelerated 4 unicorns and helped launch over 50 startups. He is trained as a social scientist with a career in technology and innovation. He's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Yegi, which is a search engine for industry professionals providing collective intelligence. He was a lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management. He is the author of The Pandemic Aftermath, published in 2020, which is sort of quite timely, unfortunately, or I guess maybe fortunately. The Disruption Came 2020 and Leadership from Below. His next book will be out in 2021 called Future Tech. We could go deeper into his bio, but I'd rather spend more time talking to him because he's here. So here we are. How are you today, Trond?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So let's just sort of dive in. So you've got what I would call, and maybe not accurately, sort of a more blended path, meaning this blend of academia with a very heavy concentration in reality, meaning you've been a part of 4 incredible startups. So sort of tell us your story, because I don't think that's a typical linear story would be my guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I agree with you. My path is always, whatever I do, I put myself at the intersection of the inside and the outside of the organization. So I think this is what explains why I have done so many different things. I always try to learn and make connections. So, my main contributions in any endeavor is to make those connections that are at the boundaries. And that, it's at the boundaries that I think the most excitement is. And it's definitely where most of the learning is, both for me, obviously, but also for the organizations that I help. So, if you look at my path, you could say, I have dabbled at a lot of different things. I have worked in government. I have worked in business. I have started companies. I have helped a lot of startups. And but largely it's all about the same thing. It is making connections, not just introducing people to each other, but it's making kind of knowledge connections and figuring out what makes sense for an organization to do and putting sort of 2 and 2 together. So if you were to look at my path, how did I get from building an innovation center and an incubator in Trondheim, Norway, to working for the EU on e-government, and then being picked up by Oracle and working out of London on technology strategy, and then subsequently working at MIT for 7 years. I mean, for me, when I look back, it all makes kind of sense. But if you just quickly look at it, you're right. It is a blended career. I haven't picked a sector. I haven't really picked an area. But it is all, if you look back and if you were to kind of look into those experiences, they're all about some sort of innovation. They actually have to do with digital technology, most of these experiences. So they are connected.
So the connections don't have to be glaringly obvious. Sometimes that's the most interesting ones, right? But if someone were to introduce you to someone else and they had to limit that introduction to Trond is the X guy, what would you define as X?
Well, you should not ask a recruiter. I once talked to a recruiter and they said, this is like pointing to your point, it's a blended career. It's very, I guess I'm hard to pinpoint that way, but I don't really walk around thinking that I am any one thing. I mean, I think what I enjoy is that I am different things. So in terms of, positioning that as thought leadership, that is maybe a little trickier. But I'm an expert in innovation, which is actually a dangerous thing to be because it's barely a field, right? It's something that changes so fast, and it's a set of tools. It's kind of an attitude to life. It's a set of networks, I guess. But it's kind of a dubious type of expertise. I will admit that because it contains so many things.
So would it be more that the X would be around the ability to solve or think or do something versus Trond has developed a set of models, frameworks, methodologies that are applied? So sort of balance that out.
You're right. I mean, if you were to take it another way, I mean, what I sometimes say to people, and this is true, is that I tend to go into situations and turn something that either is very embryonic or is actually not going very well So I'm a little bit of a turnaround person in that sense, right? I will take an embryonic project and I will try to make the best of it and really kind of bring out the possibilities in that project. And I have done that. In the EU, I took over a very unsuccessful little digital
Sure.
collaboration project, and I turned it from 150 very passive users to 150,000 users. And I've done that
Very
sort of
cool.
consecutively in lots of different contexts. Even at MIT, I was asked to build up something from scratch. And I
Got
think
it.
that, that excites me.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I want let's take this in a different direction for a moment. So you're an author, you're a thought leader, you're an academic, etc. Let's talk about then, given that you're not an easy one to define, I think it would become really clear to people when to pick up the phone and call you, but it's not as simple as a branding thing as you're the trust guy or the resilience guy, or
For
and
sure.
innovation is such an amorphous, nobody knows
Yes,
what that means anyway.
that's
So
correct.
let's talk about your business models as a thought leader.
Well, the business model in many cases is to sell pure insight. I will literally
Yep.
sell the advice. I will sell my speeches, which I've done
Yep.
very successfully, and then I sell the knowledge content. As you discussed, in terms of books or other kind of tangible output that people might be interested in. And then, you can also monetize the actual communication ability. There are a
Sure.
lot of times when I have been brought in and the value that I bring is, I guess you can call it is the network, but what it actually means is just that I know who to get in touch with to get stuff done, right? And that actually
Yep.
explains some of the stuff, I've done with some of my startups, which actually are networking platforms or expert networks where I'm pretty good at figuring out who should be working on something.
So,
So
but
it's
let's
not
push
so much,
into
so it's
let's
not
push
so much
into the books for a
mine.
minute. Right.
Right.
Right. Got it. So, but let's push on a book for a minute. So you have a concept to write a book, and as we all know, that's the worst business model, just in terms of energy in and dollars out. Right.
The book itself is
Yeah.
exactly
The
that.
book as an SKU or a barcode, horrible business
Exactly.
model. But
Exactly.
you've done 4 books, right? So when you put a book out, there might be non-business reasons to do it. It's intrinsic. It's a way to force you to solve a problem and codified, et cetera. But from a business standpoint, step one is you're going to sell the book to a certain ethnographic, psychographic, demographic at a price point that we don't care about because you're not going to make money on that.
Right.
Maybe some of those people bring you into speech, but how do you think about sort of the productization or the monetization path on a per book basis? Like, meaning who you're targeting, what the outcomes look like, how they might hire you.
Well, I mean, you're completely right. It's not the number of books you sell, or at least not the earnings on one individual book. That matters very little. It took me a little while to realize this, but
Yep.
books, as similar to many other things, even in the knowledge industry, it's about quantity and presence, right? So you have to have something meaningful to say, and it has to have a certain quality, but you just also have to say enough stuff that you are relevant for a bunch of different discussions. So unless you have a massive name recognition, and one book is basically just turning that name recognition into sales. For most of us, it's just a way to express yourself, obviously, share a position, but it is to become known as someone who has something to say. And then in different contexts, pre-COVID, I guess we were all monetizing this through speeches, right?
Right.
So a
Right.
book was a gateway to get a paid speaking engagement, which would pay for not only the publication of the book if you paid for it yourself, or even just would pay for sort of 3 months of the writing time,
Sure.
just by
Sure.
one speech.
Right.
So it's very radically different ways of monetizing from what one might assume as an author.
So let's go backwards on that. There are a couple of ways, and there isn't. I don't believe there's one right way that folks go about writing a book. One is they have a high level of specificity. I'm writing this book exactly for these type of people in these situations where it will fit like a custom made suit. Then others say, well, I'm writing the book because it's a forcing mechanism to get me to get my thoughts clear. Others write books that are a way to sort of broadcast along, a longitudinal research study or whatever. Do you have what's your style?
Peter, I guess I am atypical in that way. I'm
So we
not
have one
really.
consistent thread is
Yeah,
atypical throughout.
exactly.
That's great though.
I'm not
No,
writing
but
a
that's
book
cool. Yeah.
because I think I can monetize it. I write a book because I have to. Like this COVID book,
Okay.
this pandemic aftermath.
Yeah.
Why did I write it? I wrote it because I realized this was not going the way many people thought. And I realized this in late January. And I thought, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not going to run around and volunteer. I have kids. I don't want to expose myself to the virus
Mm-hmm.
itself. What can I do? I can write because I started to see that there were technology elements of this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
There were non sort of public health elements, and definitely things that went way beyond public health. They went into expertise areas. I had dabbled in public health, consulted on public health, but I realized the discussion wasn't really where it needed to be, which is this is going to define this decade. And we better be prepared for those kinds of discussions, either ever, beyond the economy, beyond public health. It's a much larger debate about where we want to go with our society. So I wasn't really thinking this is going to land me speaking gigs or exciting
Sure.
job
Sure.
opportunities or anything. But of course, I am conscious that making a position for myself, touching on public health, it opens up the door to some opportunities, hopefully, in that direction. But also, I think for that book, it coincided with sort of this realization that I more and more, am moving myself into more of a futurist type identity, which is a very specific thing, and it's actually took me a long time. I mean, you could maybe
So, but
criticize
so stay
my
there for a minute.
marketability, but
Sure. So if we take COVID and then we take futurist, right? So
right.
as opposed to innovation, et cetera, then what I would expect to be hearing from you down the road is not so much a public health issue, not so much the economic impacts of COVID, but as a futurist, how will we all be interacting, thinking, working? What are all the impacts of COVID beyond? I mean, obviously, first phase is we all want to get out of this thing healthy, right? And then it's a
Yeah, no, and I
luxury.
mean there
Yeah,
are some
yeah.
imperatives, but yes, exactly. So those are the things that I'm starting to focus on, and the thing is, future of work is a thread that goes back to my PhD 20 years ago, and to the book
Mm-hmm.
that I subsequently wrote on leadership from below. So this idea, actually, of being a little bit of a counterintuitive thinker and a little bit of a contrarian,
Mm-hmm.
especially on future of work, that's something that has been consistent, throughout my work. I'm, for instance, not one that thinks that we're all going to love this remote work situation. There are reasons why this has taken very long time to take hold.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts.
So there are
Well, and
no
I think
very right.
anytime we go through change, whatever that change is, or there's a new technology or disruption, people get into a binary mindset. So I remember 20 plus years ago when e-learning first became a thing, everybody said, "Oh my God, you're great. We'll never go to a workshop again. We'll never be in classrooms again."
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
reality is the first wave of e-learning was awful. It took you 3 hours to download what was basically a bloated PowerPoint. So it was awful. And then where did where learning landed was in a blended world. Like there are times where E is better. There's times where face-to-face is better. And more often than not, it's that combination. So I think the future of work thing, we all got thrown into the future,
Yes.
somewhat unprepared and unexpectedly. And, there's a lot of conversation out there that says, oh, we'll never go back to office situations. And there's others, so there's others, I can't wait to get back. So
Yeah. So I
what do you
mean,
think
it's
about
it's
that?
it's that whole thing. It's that whole thing, and I would say both for learning and for work, and they're obviously interrelated. This whole blended idea is something that I've been advocating for a long time. The shocking thing with e-learning is that I thought we were much further because these debates we have had these debates already for decades. But I think with e-learning, we were stuck. I think the experts, and I would consider myself sort of at the fringe of that. I kind of thought that we had pretty advanced tools, but it was skills that was the issue. And once, the great masses would start, deploying these things, that we would actually be in a different step change in e-learning. But I think having looked at the last 3 months of COVID, it's also pretty apparent that we actually don't have very advanced tools yet. We thought we had, and I think the paradigms are generally correct now, but we still need to have these killer applications that truly make a difference. Because otherwise, we are going to go back to not so much blended, but we're all going to, pretty much step back to where, universities, for instance, have been stuck in a teaching and, one-way learning model that originated not 200 years ago, but I mean, nearly 1,000 years ago. This is, these are enormously long timelines. So yes, futurist, which is actually, for me, a controversial statement, because futurist implies you know something about the future, which you, per definition, as an academic, you really can't. So it's been a pretty rough journey for me, even to just say, I'm going to start embracing this label. And it may have consequences. A lot of people don't like it.
Well, and I think even that term futurist through the lens of thought leadership, again, there's a spectrum. There's others that are almost pretending to read crystal balls, which is not possible. There are others that are basing predictions on actual research and logic and saying, yes, I can't predict with certainty, but here are 2 or 3 different paths and I can put some probabilities on it based on the variables I know today.
Exactly.
Asterisk, all subject to change at any time.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to be that kind of annoying futurist. You know what I'm saying? It's more scenarios a
lot of footnotes
than certainties. A little bit of footnotes here and there. I can utter the extreme statement here and there, and I have opinions. So that qualifies me, I think, to be relevant and interesting. But I also feel like it's important to not just have these futurists that are so certain about themselves that they are making all these pretty obviously falsifiable prognostication. That's the other challenge of being a futurist. I mean, these things can be falsified overnight.
Right.
I mean, COVID falsified a bunch of people overnight. It's pretty interesting.
Well, you're right. Everybody's coming out of the woodwork now as an expert, but I don't remember reading one thing a year pre-COVID about be prepared for this. We talked about pandemics and things, but to the level and the scale and the scope and the level of impact that we've all been going. I haven't seen anything other than in a science fiction movie.
In fact, even that, because think about it, in science fiction movies, you do lockdowns. Take the lockdown issue. We locked down a little city in, what was it, Mississippi or something, in Contagion or Outbreak. Or
yeah. You
lock down a little city with, 10,000 people or 1,000 inhabitants. That's nothing. We have locked down a world, and we are about to lock it down again in this intermittency scenario that is now playing out exactly according to my book, which was written in February. So I would have to say, for me, my book is going to be my best calling card, because it is a very, very extreme set of 5 different scenarios that undoubtedly will not all happen, and they won't happen as extremely as that. But if you understand scenario method, you see that I have charted some a course that we are on, a path that we might be on. And that's the point.
So let me ask you, as we start to wrap up here, put on your futurist cap and then further put on your lens of thought leadership. What do you see as sort of the future of thought leadership potentially as a result of what we've gone through? So obviously, we were talking a little earlier around, speaking sort of up in the air, but any, I hate to say predictions, but any educated hypotheses around the future of thought leadership based on where we are today?
Yeah, I think that you are very well positioned in the sense that thought leadership is going to come back with a vengeance. There is just no alternative to a knowledge-based view on the next decade. There is absolutely no alternative. The only alternative is complete ignorance and the presence of, these absolute strongmen that would just kind of kick through their perspectives, and we are going to coexist as thought leaders with those people, both in a business context and in a political context. But the backlash against sort of like thinking that everything based on zero information is going to be that we're going to need a lot of thought leaders, and they're going to be in demand. Whether they'll be out there, and you guys will be out there on the speaking circuits or not, I think is more dubitable, right? There'll be
but that's a modality. I mean, thought leadership is not parallel to speaking. That's just a format, right? So
that's just a format, and we have all adjusted. And I think as we learn more about these mass virtual events and how to do them much better, for instance, we need to get rid of this tethering to the screen. I mean, you and I are now tethered to a screen. It's ridiculous. I'm even just switching from a dynamic to a cardioid microphone so I can move back and around we have to regain movement and mobility. And once we do that, we can be thought leaders at a distance, no problem. And there's going to be, I think, a significant pent-up demand for true thought leadership on many, many issues. They won't be the same.
I think true is the key issue. So I think that just to dovetail on the point that you made, in the bucket of thought leadership, there has been other things thrown in there, like motivational, like, all that sort of stuff, which may or may not have its place in the world relative to people need to feel good and people need to be entertained and all that sort of stuff. But right now, it doesn't feel like we have the mental room for that. I mean, listen, we can go watch Netflix and be entertained, which is great. But we really need to be thoughtful now.
You're right. I mean, there's a space for a joke during a speech, but I think educational thought leadership is going to come back massively, and it's going to come back pretty fast.
Good. Wow. Thank you for that. That's interesting, and I'm a little biased, so I hope you're right.
Yeah, right.
Cool. Well, this has been great. I appreciate your time and your effort, and looking forward to seeing. Well, I hate to say, sort of what unfolds and how much of that sort of you had thoughts about early that unfold. And it's not to me. It's not about. I don't think the measure of a futurist is accuracy. It's accuracy relevant to the assumptions at the point in time those were made. And I think that's the mistake people make because. The variables change all the time. You can't solve for X when X is a moving target. So
no, and I think a thought leader is a conversation leader. You are stimulating a conversation. If you are expected to solve problems here, now you are just a consultant again, or it's a very different role. A thought leader stimulates debate, and you are more like a philosopher in that sense. You're stimulating something where the answers cannot all come from you, for sure.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Good to talk to you today.
All right. Take care.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.